All right. Hello, everyone. Um, Thank you, Akash, for joining us this early morning on a Friday morning. I'm super happy to host you on my session for Product Talk with Malti.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine a better way to start my Friday than hanging out with experienced product leader like you. And you're so fun to work with. We just worked on that newsletter, so this is my pleasure.
Thank you so much. So, folks who are joining us for the session today, first of all, welcome over to this episode. So, this is a new, live series which we are kicking off this month as part of the podcast that I do, which is called as Product Talk with Malti. And I'm super excited to have Akash with me here today. I don't think Akash needs any introduction, but I will still try to do a little bit of, introduction over here. Uh, so Akash has been into the product world for I think almost all of your experience. Is that right, Akash? Yes.
Yes, a little stint as a co-founder, which in reality, only like 20% of your job is product work, but yeah, close to product work.
Okay. Okay. So so he has been working with some very interesting work at head of product growth at a firm, and the last he worked with Apollo as VP of products, and before he found his stint as a creator. And I was very recently reading about how you kind of transitioned from your day job as a product leader, and you found your peace with as a creator. And I know that your newsletter product growth kind of is filled with such really nice nuggets, right? And very recently, you also started with your podcast. Yeah.
That's right.
And yeah, as Akash said, both Akash and I just collaborated on a piece which we released earlier this week, which is called about where we spoke, kind of went through which are some of the top Indian product, tech product companies. And it was fun. And as in fact, as we kind of went through it, when I was looking at the data, it was a lot of insights for us as well when we were kind of putting it together, right? So do tune into Akash's newsletter and do give it a read and send us your feedback on that. Do you want to add anything more there, Akash?
Yeah, send us your feedback. Let us know if we missed anybody. So far, I think 89,000 people have clicked into the piece, and nobody
Wow.
has said that we missed anything. So that was what we were worried about. We were trying to catalog the top 48 Indian tech product companies, and we think we've nailed them across private and public. It's something that's really never been done before. So hope you guys enjoy it.
Yeah. No, that's right. Because when we were scouting through the data, right, there was like no one place. We had to kind of navigate through like multiple sources when we were kind of looking at it. So I'm glad that folks, I mean, 9,000, close to 9,000 is a great number. And I'm glad people are finding value. And I'm sure that conversation, which I have kind of nailed down from today, for my conversation with Akash, moving on to that topic now. I was kind of going through his, some of the most popular series that he has done. And the one which I kind of resonated very well with me, since I also do a lot of leadership coaching and all, is that how does one transition into product leadership roles, right? That is a very slippery path, if I have to say, right? And especially um, the more you go up the ladder, it is a lot about culture fit, people management, stakeholders. So there are a lot of softer aspects beyond just the product craft, right? So I thought this is a great topic for us to pick up, and especially given in today's scenario where, we have a lot of folks who are aspiring, transitioning into product management role, product leadership roles, and definitely as we go up the ladder, these roles get far and few, right? So Akash and I are going to kind of talking about today some of these, questions. So I'll probably and probably Akash, if you want to kind of share the link to your that article, probably at the end of the conversation, we could also probably put it there so that folks can have a read. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. All right. So Akash, probably I'll start. I mean, you have held leadership roles at various organizations, right? So when you are looking to hire somebody, or any of the leaders, when they're looking to hire a product leader in their team, what are some of the most important traits that they look for?
And even before I get to the question, just on this topic of transitioning to product leadership, I would recommend to anybody that if you have not managed product managers before, do not go out and seek a job managing product managers because this is a very hard job. I would say this is one of the hardest jobs I could think of out there. And it's a crazy hard transition. So you want to make the transition to product leadership somewhere where the entire executive leadership team already believes in you. You've already shipped a bunch of really good IC products, and they're like, you need to go become a leader because you're so good. That's how you actually want to transition into product leadership. So even if you're 20 years in your career, if you've just been an IC, go find another IC role and move into leadership at that place. So with that caveat in mind, you're already a leader now. Let's say you're managing 2-3 PMs,
Akash,
but
sorry to interrupt you. A lot of folks are saying that they can barely hear you. Can
they
you
can
check your
barely hear
audio?
me. I can turn the gain up on this. Can they hear
Yes.
me better now?
Can somebody please put in the chat if they can? You can hear. Okay, they are
Can
saying
you
much
hear
better.
me better now?
All right.
All
Sorry.
right. Yes, it was in my podcast recording setup where we turn the gain way down and then we turn the audio up at the end. So thank you guys for interrupting me there for live. So what I was just briefly saying is that don't become a product leader via interview. Become a product leader via promotion. So now what we're talking about is how do I go get that next product leadership job? Usually, people think about it on a couple vectors. One, I want to manage a bigger team. Or two, I want to manage a bigger part of the product. Or three, I want to work at a bigger company that pays better. So those are usually the three vectors that people are seeking. So before I get into what are interviewers looking for, let me get into what mistakes people make. The number one mistake that product leaders make in interviews is they choose stories from when they were an IC. And you need to realize that the stories you ask, even when they say, hey, what about a conflict with an engineer? Don't choose an IC engineer because who do leaders work with? Leaders, especially product leaders, they usually work with people plus one title. So if you are interviewing for director of product, choose a conflict with a VP of engineering. So you need to choose the aperture of your stories to be that next layer of leadership above your level. That's the number one most important principle I can tell you. I have coached many people who get down leveled. So basically they were going for director and then they get a senior manager offer. And it's always the case that when I dig in, when we look at the recordings of their interviews, they had too many stories from too far in their past. So you need to choose stories from that recent past that demonstrate that senior leadership. That's the first thing. The second mistake that people make is they assume that product leadership is all about product. Guess what? The moment you were promoted to becoming a product leader, leaders started looking to you to create impact on marketing, to create impact on sales, to create impact on customer success. So you have to also weave into your impact, your stories. This starts from your tell me about yourself, right? When the interview starts, but this even ends with the questions you ask. For instance, you need to ask not just about the structure of the product team, but ask about the structure of the product marketing team, ask about the structure of the product analytics team. You need to be that leader who's thinking more broadly about how to drive success for product development. So number one, recent experience stories. Number two, impact outside of product. Number three, each company has a different culture. So some companies, they might have a culture. We know Meta, for instance, right now, that leaders are rolling up their sleeves and they're doing IC work. So then you need to match that culture. 5 years ago, when I was interviewing for most of my director roles at places like ThreadUp, the tide had shifted. It was more about, did you empower your teams? And so that's when I was interviewing at ThreadUp for director of growth. It was like all my stories were about empowering the team because that's what that company cared about. So the third thing is to demonstrate the leadership style that via your research, you expect that company to want. Do those resonate with you, Malti? Is there anything you would add?
No, I think I kind of very, very bang on number one on the talk about more recent experiences because, I remember talking to somebody, for example, when I was hiring for a senior manager, product manager in my organization. This is at my time at PayPal, for example. This person was talking about projects he had done like 5 years back, 4 years back, right? So, and as you said, there is the style, the technology, the nuances. They are changing evolving very fast, right? So that is definitely bang on. And the second thing I would definitely say is that in especially when you come over to the leadership role, it is just not about my team, it is just not about engineering team or the team I closely collaborate with, because a product strategy, for example, which you are influencing, is basically a kind of a just one wheel in the larger picture, right? So whether it is operations, marketing, sales, your leadership, because I think product leadership, I think if I have to just sum it up in 3 lines, Akash, my experience is it's a lot about managing up, it's managing your peers, and it is managing down.
Love
Right?
that. So how do you demonstrate all three of those skills in your questions? And that's a really good mental check midway through the interview.
Right.
Oh shoot, most of my stories have been about managing up. That's a common mistake, actually. So they hear what I just said, and then they just focus on managing up. Oh, well, you need managing side and managing down too. So make sure
Right.
you get that whole picture.
Yes. Yes. I mean, having that 360 view. And I think probably, kind of moving on to that next segment, Akash, I would say is that, I mean, even, like as the whole software product management is kind of evolving, the tech landscape is evolving. I would say even the kind of rounds that you have, for example, and of course, it varies from organization to organization. I would say that has also evolved. For example, there is, as you said, there is a lot of focus on the culture fitment aspect, right? So, what has been your experience in terms of, what are the different rounds, and how do you think folks who are looking to transition or to a new company, what should they expect there?
Yeah, so when I got my director of growth role at ThreadUp back in, this would be 2014. So that was
Mm-hmm,
10 years ago when I got my
mm-hmm,
first director of product role. Uh,
mm-hmm,
I think I had like 4 interviews, literally.
mm,
I went in. This was back when in person was a thing. I remember I wore a blazer. Nobody at the office was wearing a blazer, but they liked that I was professional about it. Uh, and first thing I did, I spoke with our chief product officer and our CTO, and it was just like 2 people for an hour. They liked me. A week later, I drive back up to San Francisco. I was in Palo Alto at the time. I meet with their CEO and our president. They liked me. At that point, I basically had the offer, but they said, why don't you go ahead and meet with, our 1 PM and our one growth person as well, who would be on your team. So basically, there was the part where they interviewed me from above. They realized I was a good fit, but they wanted to make sure I could manage the team that I was going to be managing. So I talked to them. That was it.
yes.
Now, when I was interviewing for VP roles last year in
Mm-hmm.
2023, 9 years later, every process was like 11 interviews. And each process had homework. And usually that homework was a lot of work. We're talking about often they would ask me,
Mm-hmm.
what is going to be my product growth strategy when I step in? That means
Um,
I need to go talk to their customers. I need to go use their product. I need to go use their competitors' products. I need to analyze their competitors' products on YouTube. I need to go talk to some VCs who have better perspective on how they need to be growing. So I'd have to do all of this work for a homework assignment, which I would often present to the CEO. So at VP roles, it's very, very common that they'll have you, and your CPO will usually already be in your corner by this point. They'll be like, you'll be one of the last 2 or 3 candidates, and then you'll present for like an hour with the CEO, and he'll just pick all the holes in your strategy. And obviously you don't have the context of their business, so he's going to think your strategy is pretty dumb. And so you need to then evolve it as he's giving you more context. He's like, yeah, we tried that. You're like, okay. So based on that information, here's how I would change it. So basically, to summarize, like there's 3 things that have changed in the process. 1, it's much, much longer. 2, there's always homework and a presentation. And 3, there's so much more competitive candidates out there. There are so many VPs of product that are out of a job right now just looking. versus in 2014, all those VP of products were employed. ThreadUp was just happy to get me. And so it wasn't as competitive and I didn't need to prepare as much. Does that resonate with your recent job searches?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, we have seen, especially after COVID and the whole funding winter thing, the whole I think the whole landscape has kind of changed quite a bit. And you're right, for a few jobs, there are a lot of aspirants, if I have to say. So, the whole process is very, very tightened now, right? Especially people want to make sure that they can't afford a mistake of hiring a not right leader, right? Otherwise, it kind of impacts all the three levels that we just spoke about, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So my experience, and of course, for me, it was during COVID, let's say, and a little before COVID is when I kind of transitioned into different organizations. And on an average, I did not have like 11 rounds, definitely, but I did have a fair number of rounds. I think the first one, which I have seen, usually is where the hiring manager is actually usually the first thing that they are trying to judge is that, is this person the right fit for the organization from an aspirational perspective, from the background perspective, from the fitment of the needs of the jobs that it requires, right? And I think that becomes like the first this filter in order to do that. And typically my experience has been definitely couple of rounds, especially from a product strategy perspective. You get somebody probably from a design or engineering or quality. If it is a growth role, I would say maybe more of marketing, sales people. I would say one or two folks talking to you just to understand how you have worked, what have been the values. And yes, a combination of, I would say, hypothetical questions, digging into your resumes to see what, the work that you have done. Um, Interestingly, and this is something which I have learned in one of my earlier organizations, is the case study based approach, right? So, give you a kind of a case study, which is definitely requires you to go and dig out a lot about the organization. But I think that kind of also shows your commitment to kind of you have towards that interview and these things. So that is one area where I have seen probably, your hiring manager and a couple of folks which you have already spoken to coming together and do it like a conversations, right? It's like a more deep dive discussions. And as you said, left, right, center shooting you these questions, right? And then usually it will be probably with the skip level of the hiring manager as well, just to see that, in terms of further conversations. So on an average, I have seen about 4 to 5, a majority of them trying of getting an kind of assessment of your product sense, your strategy, the work that you have done, a cultural fitment, and then the others kind of assessing you for other aspects, right?
I'm glad you got into some actual efficient processes. Yeah, when I last job search, literally there was not a single one that was less than 9 interviews. So usually what ends up happening is like, well, at least for me, luckily, is like I'd pass all the skip levels, like those I was particularly good at. And then once they were like basically ready to hire me, they'd have the entire team that's reporting to me interview me as kind of like a final culture check. So that's why, like, even if you could get all your skip levels and your case studies and your homework done in 4 interviews, often in these leadership roles, you'll have at least 5 people reporting to you. And so all of them will interview you.
Correct. Absolutely right. I mean, in my case, because I usually work with large organizations, so I would have, let's say, a local India site leader first, also talking to me. I would also have the skip level of my hiring manager also talking to me. So yeah, I mean, I think these are also different nuances that we have, right? So, Akash, I mean, as you kind of also coach folks, right? I mean, from a likelihood for them to be able to crack these conversations, how do you recommend that they should prepare, right? What kind of case studies should they prepare? What kind of topics should they prepare? How should one go about doing it?
So it's very different at the level of leadership we're talking about. So, group product manager, you are going to expect a lot of case study interviews still: product execution, product strategy, product design. Director, you might have one or two. VP, it's almost useless. It's a waste of their time to do it. If they do it, they might do one product strategy. What would you do if you were CEO of YouTube or something like that?
Mhm.
But much more likely for VP, SVP, CPO roles, they're going to ask you about that company in particular. And because they're going to expect that you have industry, domain, and product knowledge that you can just talk directly about their company.
Right.
So, with that in mind, if you're at a lower level, you need to do the mix of the IC job search preparation and the leadership. But if you're at the high level, just focus more on the leadership. So let me talk about what IC and leadership preparation looks like. For IC preparation, I highly recommend that you basically treat this like a full-time job on top of your full-time job. You want to be spending 30, 40 hours a week. And I know people are going to be like, what are you talking about? I don't have that time in my life. But unfortunately, your competition that's succeeding, and I've seen this in coaching people again and again. I have two types of students, right? The first type, and I liken this back to learning an instrument or a sport when you were a kid, right? So you had the rich kid who's got the best private tutor, and they just go to that private tutor once a week. And you know who gets ahead? It's that poor hungry kid who has, the group lesson once a week, but at home they're practicing a lot, right?
Mhm.
Those are the people that always succeed. And it's the exact same thing for the job search. Sure, you can pay for some expensive coaching, some expensive services, et cetera, but that's not what's going to drive you to success. That's more of like a discipline barometer, a barometer of how your progress is going. What's actually going to drive your success is this 30 to 40 hours a week you're putting in, which means, 3 to 4 hours in the evening, 8 to 9 hours in the weekend. Yeah, I'm serious, guys. Like, you actually need to work on this. And what are you doing in that time? So each person has a different way of learning, but I can tell you certain tactics are better than others. The number one most important advice I give people is stop reading and start practicing. I know I write a newsletter and I want you to read my content, but it's much more important for you to turn on Zoom by yourself and record yourself and look at your answers.
Mhm.
You will be surprised how many ums and ahs you have in there, how many breaks you have in there, how little structure you have, how hard you are to follow. I haven't said and ah this whole podcast because I do this every day and I go look at my videos, but 99.9% of you are not communicating that way. There's almost no one I talk to who is communicating that way. So you need to practice. And then you need to find peers who can give you good feedback. And there are so many platforms for this, whether it's Exponent, TopMate, my Slack group, LinkedIn, whatever you want to do. So you need to find those peers to give you that feedback. And you also want to go to YouTube and you want to compare, you want to pause videos as they're doing a case study and compare your answer to the YouTube answer. So you need to just practice, 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 practice. That's the IC. Now let's go to the leadership. So for leadership, it's very different. As I mentioned, you really need to crack the nut on that company. And then you need to crack the nut on these behavioral questions. Those are basically what you're going to get. You get very few case studies. So your behavioral questions are more like, tell me about a time you had to fire a PM in your first month. Tell me about a time that you had to reorg your whole team, and tell me about a time when you faced 50% attrition. Tell me about a time when you and your director of engineering didn't see eye to eye. These very hard questions. You need to have good stories ready. And as a leader, you can't have BS stories. Like conflict with the director of engineering, how was it solved? We had one meeting and it was solved. Like that's not a real conflict then. You guys didn't have a true conflict. A real conflict would be something that was persistent, like this director of engineering had the point of view that my team should be writing really detailed PRDs. I disagreed for a variety of reasons. Over the course of 3 to 4 months, we came to a shared understanding after iterating over several PRD templates, having several meetings, consulting with several other product teams, talking to our CEOs, talking to our actual engineers and PMs down the line. Like that's what a real conflict and a real conflict resolution looks like. So you need to go through all these tough questions. You need to practice your answers to those. That's on the one side for the behavioral. And then for the company side, you need to go use the product. And guess what? A lot of you guys are interviewing at places where you don't have access to the product. It's an enterprise product. You need a corporate email just to sign up. What are you going to do, right? You need to go email your recruiter and say, I need access to a demo account to get to know your product better. That's the hack, right? Everybody has a demo account, so you can get access to their product. So you do that, you learn the product. And then, as I mentioned, you go talk to customers of their product. You talk to competitors. You go talk to VCs to understand the trajectory that this company needs to take. So that's the leadership side. And I think they're totally different. And the big mistake leaders make is they prepare like an IC. And that's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah. No, I think those are some very, very wonderful points, Akash. And if I may add, one of the things, for example, I definitely say, and I have done it also, is that spend some time to do these reflections, right? Especially when you're going to these leadership roles, exactly as you said, this is a lot of based on your softer aspects of your day-to-day work, right? So reflect back on the products you have built, the projects that you have done, the interactions you have had, and actually jot it down. So I think that reflections is also something which brings in a lot of, how do I say, genuineness into the conversations, because you are not, kind of imagining anything, but you're actually putting in your actual, talking about your actual experiences. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Akash, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to probably take in one of there are a lot of questions coming in. Yeah. So I'm going to
All
probably
right.
pick up one questions. While you have covered a lot of goodness here, in terms of preparing both for the IC as well as for, let's say, the leadership roles, which also has a fair amount of people management. One question which kind of goes a little bit more deeper is that there is definitely an intense competition. How do you stand out from the rest, right? I mean, there are, for example, if there is a position that comes over in LinkedIn, within 3 hours, we see 200 people have already applied.
Yeah, there's
Right?
two elements to standing out, and I'd be really curious on your opinion as well.
Uh-huh.
So they're standing out before the interview, and then they're standing out during the interview. So
Right.
if you're struck, first of all, understand where your standout question is. I talk to so many job seekers day in, day out, and my first question is always the same. But they never have the answer prepared. How is your funnel doing? How many applications did you make and how many interviews did you get? How many interviews do you have on a daily and weekly basis? My recommendation for a job search is that you're targeting one interview a day. So if you are below one interview a day, then probably you need to work on standing out to get more interviews. Now, if you are getting a lot of interviews, but you are not converting them to offers, then your problem is standing out during the interviews. So that's how you identify which area to focus on. So how do you stand out to get the interview? Everybody has different strategies, but the most effective ones in this market, let me tell you, it is not to go write a growth strategy document for that company before you know nothing about that company and then try to send it to the PMs. You know what you're doing? You're trying to write a blog post, like the blog post that I write, and you're trying to shop it around to get a job. But what's the problem there? One, you haven't written the 1,000 blog posts that I've written. Two, you haven't worked inside the company, so your insights are not going to be mind-blowing to them. Everything that you are going to write, they are going to have seen before, they're going to have thought about before. There's just zero chance that you're going to have something insightful. So this is like the common mistake people make, is like they just create a PRD or a strategy and then they try to shop it around to get a job. And those documents, whenever I talk to hiring managers, they're like, this document wasn't impressive. In fact, this document made me not want to hire them because I thought they couldn't write a document at the quality we need to write it at. So everybody's doing the work product wrong. You can do the work product correctly though. So let's say you understand the specific hiring manager, specific role. Let's say, for instance, you want to work on Tesla's display for what it looks like in maps. And you have previously been working on Apple Maps and Apple CarPlay. Well, you know some very interesting things that Tesla doesn't know. So you can put together a short one pager that talks about, hey, here's like 3 insights I got from my job at Tesla. Here's how I think it might, my job at Apple. Here's how I think it might apply to Tesla. And here's a quick sketch of what it might look like if we investigated further to see if it would work. And here's what the impact might be. You can write that document in 1 hour. And look, nobody else can write that. It's demonstrating unique insight. And even if you don't get the job, they'll be happy that they opened that document because they just learned something about what Apple is doing. So if you want to do a work product to stand out, do that. But even before you get to a work product, most people in standing out are missing out on the basics, which is number 1, customize your resume. Each and every bullet point on your resume should be advancing your case versus the competition for that role. You wouldn't believe how many customized resumes I get where people are just trying to put all their best accomplishments. But if you're applying for a growth role, they don't care that you reduced support tickets. If you're applying for a growth role, they don't care that you built a platform. You need to only include the bullet points related to growth, and you need to round out your picture around growth. So that's a huge mistake that people make, is not customizing their resume properly. The second thing is you need to have the best application. And what does a good application have? It has referrals. It often has a cover letter. It often involves reaching out to people on LinkedIn to let them know that you have applied. So you need to do all those things. That's how you stand out in interviews. And if we're talking about leadership specifically, 70% of leadership jobs are not listed. So you need to have a really good LinkedIn. I look at so many people's LinkedIns. They don't have a banner image. They don't have a headline that's very strong. They don't have detailed in all of their experiences. If they have an About Me section, that About Me section was written 5 years ago. These are basics. They don't have recommendations. They don't have skills listed under each job. You need to have an amazing LinkedIn so that people actually find you. So that's how you stand out to actually get the interview. Now, standing out in the interview, this is a different ball game altogether. So the first thing you need to realize is that everybody else they're interviewing is good. So a lot of the details that people like to include, for example, why Microsoft? Oh, I like Microsoft because it's a leader in gaming and you guys are doing a lot of good AI stuff. And well, ICPM could say that. What is your unique analysis, having been a VP of product? As a VP of product at Apollo, I got to see how Microsoft uses its distribution advantage to embed its CRM inside of so many companies. And I love that. I love that you guys are using your built-in distribution to create these new product areas and drive new revenue lines. Now look at that. Now that's some analysis that only you could do based on your unique experience that is showing that you think at a next level on product. So that's how you need to think about it. And then the second thing is all of you have weaknesses for any role you're interviewing. The most common weaknesses that you guys have, if you're listening to this, are you don't have a job right now. A lot of you guys say that it was like a personal break. I don't, no interviewer likes that. Okay, guys? I know you think that they're okay with your mental health break. They're not. Okay? Because the other candidates are also good. So it's much better to come up with some better story. Like hopefully part-time during your mental break, you were volunteering at some place, or you were working with some startup, or you're advising some companies. So talk about that. In my recent stint advising companies, and my recent stint as a fractional PM, and my recent stint as an interim PM. So you need to address your weaknesses, because what ends up happening is when you don't get an interview, they often liked you. But then they just have these weaknesses in the back of their mind. Yes, we had 2 good VP of product candidates, but one had a 1-year personal break. We're just going to go with the other one. Or we had these 2 director of product candidates, but one had more domain specific experience. Both were SaaS, but one was actually sales tech. So you need to go out there. You need to think about what those excuses to not hire you would be. And in each interview, each and every interviewer needs to be convinced that that weakness is not a real weakness. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I was just thinking that while we, say that especially as you go up in the ladder, right? While as much you work with the direct KPIs that you have or the work that you do, you need to look beyond that, right? So I think coming to the first part, where that how do you even stand out, getting calls for the interview, right? I think you kind of covered a lot of things. I would say that it is needed that you kind of show the goodness of the work that you have done, right? People should be able to see that, what does this person's brand stands for. Talking about putting your thought leadership out there is very, very important. For example, personally for me, my last, I think 3 or 4 jobs were all through reference, right? Like, I mean, somebody reached out saying that, we are looking for this, and that's how it happened. So I would say, and that's a great way to even polish the work that you have done, extract the essence of the depth of the work that you have, and put it out there for others to consume. Right? I mean, something, for example, you do through your newsletter, right? So establishing your thought leadership, especially at a senior positions, is very important, because the idea is that how can you think big? How do you take everybody along? How do you are able to quickly gather insights, you make sense out of things, right? So I think that is, I would say, even for getting this chance for the interview part of it, how do you stand out? I think I would say that's a very important aspect. And the second aspect which you spoke about, standing out, I completely agree. Even in fact, the other point you said, right, customizing your resume for that job, very, very important, because that shows that out of the 10 checklist items that I have, he or she marks, let's say, the 8 of them, right? And I would say one more thing, especially during an interview, I think you kind of briefly touched upon that point, Akash, especially even when I used to hire folks in my team, or when I have given, I think, do not jump into giving an answer. It doesn't mean that Akash asked me the questions and I need to give the answer in the next 5 seconds. I think it is absolutely okay to take like a few seconds just to collect your thoughts. Otherwise, I feel you're just going to blabber. So
Yeah.
please take a few seconds off, collect your thoughts, try to give a structure, right? Because you need to have and especially a lot of interviews these days happen online, right? It is very easy we have too many distractions. I may have a notification coming in and I might just get distracted. So how do you keep the the interviewer engaged with you, right? I'll give you one example. There was one I was hiring for a GPM role, somebody in my team, and this was like a 30-minute conversation. I asked her the first question: tell me about yourself. Yeah, you will not believe, Akash, I did not speak for the next 29 minutes.
It's happened to me too. And polite interviewers might not interrupt you. And early on in my career, I wouldn't interrupt you. I would just immediately yeah, I'm not hiring you.
Exactly, right?
Nowadays, if you find an interview with me, I'll just cut you off after 2 minutes. I'll say, okay.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to
Because
waste
I'm just
time.
bored. Like it's a huge waste of my time, or I might even just go and start reading somebody on my team's PRD and start commenting, because at that point, like, you've just totally lost me. But a lot of companies I
Exactly.
work at, they're like very strict about how their interviewers behave. So
You're right.
then in that case, I will just like sit there and like, but you're definitely not getting the role. In
Yeah.
fact, I think that the biggest mistake people make is people treat interviews like podcasts or like LinkedIn lives. I do have permission from Multi to go talk for 3 or 4 minutes at a time. In an interview, you don't.
Yeah.
3 minutes is the absolute max cap.
Absolutely.
But as you said, in a distracted world, 2 minutes is much better.
I agree. I agree. So I think for me, those are very, like red flags. If a person is giving me too long an answer, all over the place, is not able to collect the thoughts, has not done their homework in terms of what the organization is all about. So for me, those are some red flags, and I would say those could be things that could help you to not getting selected if you do not practice those things. So that would be some of those aspects. Okay, so I'm going to pick up one more question. I think you kind of answered. Does a resume break to pursue a business idea? Okay, this is interesting. Probably you want to take this, Akash. Does a resume break to pursue a business idea look bad in the eyes of recruiters? Or is it just a way for recruiters to bring our CTC down as part of the interview process?
uh, Actually, recruiters don't want to bring your CTC down. They want to bring it into the range for the role.
Yeah.
And actually, most recruiters are paid as a percentage of the salary that you acquire. So think about that for a second. You wanna be on the same team as them. They're often getting paid like 10% of how much you make. So if you both can earn more together, great. So
Yeah.
use the information they have about the range, about the budget to get at the very high end of the budget, and that will be perfect for them. So that's a huge misconception out there.
I would
Now,
say.
I can tell you guys, yeah, your breaks are hurting you like crazy. And it's mostly because of how you talk about your breaks.
Mm.
Just don't talk about it as a break. Why is it a break? Why did you need to take a break? Nobody likes the type of person who needs to take a break. I'm sorry, guys. I know some of you guys are truly like, Gen Zs, and you go to therapy and you think that this is all good and well, but people from multi and my generation, no, we look down upon that. We tend to think that the best people that have so many opportunities, they're always working, they're super driven, they're awesome. So how should you talk about your break? Not, oh, I was laid off, I was fired, then I had to recollect myself and take 6 months for myself just to understand, which really you were just job searching, but you didn't find a job. No, I was working on my startup. I decided that, I'm a PM, but I always had aspirations to start my own thing. So I needed to go out and do that myself. And, along the way, finding product market fit is not easy. Like the 99% of other startups, I did not find product market fit, but I learned these three things along the way. Boom, boom, boom. So if you tell it in this driven way, if you tell it as, I was a startup founder, people love that. And in fact, what I've noticed is that the closer you are to Silicon Valley, the more they like that. So if you're in Silicon Valley itself, they love that.
Yeah.
If you are in New York City, they like it. And if you're in Bangalore, they like it. But yeah, if you're in Silicon Valley or you're in Seattle, like, it's awesome. Like, in fact, most PMs that you see, like the group product managers at Google and stuff, they have like multiple stints where they were founders. So it's just expected.
Actually, that has rubbed off big time even in Bangalore in India as well. Because people are open, right? Because people are now okay to take these risks. And actually, Akash, companies like these people because they are very high on ownership. They are, raging to do something on their own. They are well read. So that aspect is actually very highly appreciated. Definitely, I
Awesome.
mean, I would say probably some companies have a higher appetite for it versus some other companies. But this is, I would say, definitely seen as a positive trait, especially if you're able to articulate and showcase that the break that you had, how did you really utilize it? What did you learn? What were some of the things that you were working on? I think that is appreciated.
Yeah, they much prefer that you were spending 40 to 50 hours a week working, not that you were preparing for a triathlon or whatever. Even though that was true, like, just leave those details out.
Right. I agree. I agree. Yep. Okay. So this is an interesting question. Okay. Since you both mentioned, this is from Rashmi. She says, since you both mentioned that hiring processes are lengthier and far more complex than they used to be, do you think these processes are actually helping companies hire the right candidate?
Personally, no. I think I'm a data driven person. I think from having been in product my entire career, and the data shows that I think it's what, after 5. So had a stint at Google. So I got to see like the inside data. So they would actually plot like how many more interviews and how much did that improve our accuracy of whether we would hire, plus the first performance review. So they would have these beautiful regression charts. And I think it was after 5 interviews that there was no signal added.
Hmm.
So Companies are just putting these in here to reduce their risk. Hiring managers are putting these in here to reduce their risk. Also, because there's just a glut of candidates. Oftentimes, by the time you get through 5 interviews, there are 3 candidates you like. And so you're like, okay, let me just put them through 4 more interviews so that 2 of them get some no's and we'll just take that next one. So that tends to be the case, at least in my opinion. The best thing people can do to add to their process, if they're working with somebody, ideally is do a work trial. And a work trial, I think, does improve your ability to hire the right people. Because if you work with somebody for a day or a week, you get a very, very good sense of how they work. After a week of working with somebody, I immediately know whether they're a fit. Like there are some people who they just love to talk. They'll jump on a meeting, they'll waste your time, and they'll tell you about they did this, they did that. There are other people who are just moving the ball forward every single day. And they were just telling you about results. And those are the types of people that generally have success, especially post-ZERP era. And so the work trial, I think, does improve it. The additional interviews, I just haven't seen any data to support it. But do you disagree? Do you think that these longer processes are helping?
I mean, I personally haven't gone through this rigor, but if you ask me if I would be the leader, see, I mean, hiring people is an investment from an organization as well, right? And it is a very, very expensive affair, right? So that means if I have to put in 10 rounds, 11 rounds, that means X number of people, giving that amount of time. And then, as you said, you have to kind of draw the insights, see what each one of has to say. So it's a lot of these things. But I think one reason probably also is that because there are just so many people out there, they want to make sure that the bar is raised high and they kind of get the most suitable candidate for the job, right? And sometimes probably they are also testing the resilience, saying that, okay, if you can stay, then you are really, really keen to join us. But I agree with you. I also haven't really seen data points which says that, if you have gone through so much, then we take it. In fact, I don't know. It was a little these things. I remember one of my ex-colleague. He actually went through the whole 11 rounds in one of the big tech companies. And he was supposed to get, I think, some 5 referrals from the people he had worked with, right? And I was very surprised because it said that the referrals that came in did not make a huge case in terms of the affirmations, and they kind of stopped the process after that, which was like, okay, I mean, I really don't understand, right? Because
That's happened to a couple of people I've coached recently. So
okay.
basically, working with me, they were able to get really good at interviews.
Uh-huh.
And then the company would back channel
Uh-huh.
people who they used to work with who are in their network, usually who they're their skip levels.
Uh-huh.
Once you get to the skip level stage, CPOs, basically every single CPO knows all the other CPOs.
I
And
agree.
so they would just back channel. And yeah, oftentimes the CPOs would say something that the interviewer hadn't said, like, oh yeah, we actually laid them off, or they had some struggles. We flexed up their team to 11 PMs, but then we had to take it back down to 5. And then when they found out about those things, they didn't get the offer. So yeah, back channel referrals, I do think are a great signal and a great thing to do as a company. So I would much rather do 5 interviews and 5 back channel referrals. And I think you'd get much better signal.
I agree. I agree. But I actually want to ask a little deeper in one thing which you said, which is about work trials, right, Akash? I've never heard about that. Is that a trend? Does that really happen?
Oh, yes. It's a huge trend. So all the best companies that you guys are thinking about these days, linear,
Uh-huh.
work trials, 37 Signals, work trials, Gumroad, work trials. Yeah, it's the new way. I think it'll become a new trend. Here's the problem, though. If you're hiring somebody who's already employed as a VP or a CPO,
Right.
even if they take a vacation day, they're working,
I
as
agree.
anybody who's held these roles knows. So you can't do a proper work trial.
Right.
Um, and so if you're currently employed, doing a work trial is tough. And work trial ends up meaning you end up selecting from the pool of not currently employed, but not currently employed pool is much worse than the currently employed pool. Anybody who's ever hired knows that. So that's the trade-off that companies face.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it has seems to have its own pros and cons. But this is one new thing that I learned today. But I was not aware of something called as work trial.
For my
Uh,
own business, I only do work trials. Yeah, I don't even need to interview you. Yeah, just LinkedIn message me and let's start working on something. Even Malti, like I got to see how she works at the collaboration. It's like with every collaborator, it's like a mini work trial.
right, right,
At
right.
the end of it, like the other people in my business, like yeah, they were collaborators who at the end of it, I was just like, oh my God, you're amazing. You need to work with me.
Yeah, that's right. No, I mean, I'm a little puzzled, especially, when you are doing it with a big tech company, especially if you have to do work trial, because there are things you can share, you cannot share, and how much really can you, make out of that?
Big
But
tech is very unlikely to do a work trial in 2024. In
mm,
2034, I think it'll totally change.
mm, yeah, I mean, every year there is a new dimension, there is a new way of working, right? I mean, prior to COVID, nobody thought that people could work online, but I mean, we kind of found and we have made peace with it.
Yep.
So yeah, I agree on that. So there are a bunch of questions coming in. Just give me a okay. There's a question from SS which says, does it really matter from learning perspective if you are a PM in an enterprise company or a mid-sized startup? Okay, you want to take that?
You should take it. You worked at the true enterprises of enterprises.
Yeah. See, I mean, you know what? Actually, one of the reasons I actually decided to take a plunge to work with startups as a consultant was that I had that FOMO that I have always worked in these big enterprises and I have never worked in a startup hustle culture, right? So I would say, see, I mean, if you want to talk about scaling up, when you're talking about problems of scale, when you are talking about complex products, and especially in big companies, you have like multiple product lines, you really have to be, even, to make, let's say, a checkbox as a default, you probably have to check with like five teams to say that, can I really do that? Does it have a downstream impact or does it have an upstream impact, right? So I would say learning is absolutely there, whether you're working in a startup or you're working in a big large enterprise. There is there is nothing that goes for waste, right? Because, for example, the lessons that I learned during my 22 years working with large enterprises is something that I'm able to now apply and use for the startups with whom I work in order to help them scale up. Because typically the let's say, if I have to just say, especially when you are in a 0 to 1 or a 1 to 10 stage, you are just running, you don't care about processes, you're just trying to get your problem solution fit, you're just trying to get your product market fit, right? So but when you already have millions of customers paying you, right, your business as usual is the 90%, because that's the cash cow, right? But you still want to hustle, you still want to innovate, you want to spend your budget on things which will probably pay for the next 10 years, right? So there has to be that balance. And people do not appreciate this, especially in small startups. But if you have to scale, I always say, building good products is like three dimensions. You need to have the right product, you need to have the right processes, and you need to have the right set of people, right? If you do not have the structure, if you do not have the processes in place, you are forever going to remain in chaos. You will not be able to scale, right? So I would say there is no right or wrong here. Each world has their own pros and cons, but and there are learnings which you can apply, in one form. So there are always these transferable skills which you have acquired, which can be applied for that. Okay, I'm going to take up some more questions here. Uh, okay, this is interesting. Could you please share your thoughts on who are the usual stakeholder types that take the interview and what is important to highlight for each of these persona? I think you kind of touched upon that, but you want to kind of just summarize that a little bit, probably, since people are
Sounds like we
asking
want to
that.
do a lightning round. So I'll just be very brief on this, guys. You
Yeah.
have your hiring manager. What do they care about? Your ability to work with them and take their direction, but also reflect well on them. You have your design partner. What do they care about? Your ability to do involved design in the actual process and not dictate to them. You have your engineering partner. What do they care about? Your ability to actually get into the weeds, not just to be pie high in the sky, and actually go ahead and prioritize things like technical debt or platform refactors when those matter. You have your marketing counterpart. What do they care about? Your ability to actually identify features in advance and not be obsessed with now, next to later, and not giving dates and not helping them actually do their functions. You have sales. What do they care about? Your ability to care about the sales led motion and not just keep driving self serve and product led and hurting them and stealing their leads and stealing their employees and actually being able to do specific custom requests for specific big enterprise clients. So you have these different stakeholders that tend to come up. And then finally, CEO, if we're talking about leadership, they are almost always part of the process, especially VP. What do they care about? Your ability to push forward their business and have a relentless results mindset, not an organization mindset. So that's what I tend to see as like the most important things. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you kind of covered, and we kind of spoke about this in length in our previous questions. You kind of summarized it pretty well. I think there is one question, and probably I would suggest they should go and check out your newsletter article. But there are some there is a question: is that what are your some of go-to interview questions for a director level or higher in product?
That I ask? Okay. For me, I want to understand about a lot of the questions that I've already talked about. Number one, how do you deal with when you disagree with me? Number two, how do you deal with when you have low performing employees? Number three, how do you give opportunities for high successful employees? Number four, how are you going to make me look good to my skip level? Those are probably the four topics that matter most to me. Are there any that matter particularly to you?
Yeah, I think I would say I would probably give a little context also to the product stage for which I'm hiring, right? For example, because a lot of aspects which you spoke about on the director level is a behavioral aspect of it, but I would probably double down a little bit more around how do you think, for example, if it is a product which is kind of now going from, let's say, 100 to 1,000, how do you think you are going to influence that, right? So I would probably look at what this person brings onto the table and try to do a little deep dive saying that how do you think you will be able to take this product to that next level. For me, one of the key things I think you also spoke about is stakeholder, right? How do you think you are going to run a tight ship when you have so many moving parts? And I think a very important thing from a director level, I would also say, especially if it is a mid to small size startup, is that how do you manage the expectations of, let's say, the leadership in terms of prioritization, right? Because you're like constantly running on the treadmill. So what are your guiding principles for prioritization? So those would be especially from a, I would say, making sure that you're still building a strategy which is very aligned to organization. So how do you think from that perspective? Those are some of the questions that I would add.
Great addition. Yeah. Product sense is really, really important at the director level. So I'm
Right.
going to want to understand like how many features do you ship that don't make sense? How many teams do you create that don't make sense? And those should be at a very minimum.
Right. And I think I would also sum it up with how do you measure success, right? Because I keep hearing this from a lot of product managers that, we are just feel like we are a feature factory. And so how do you measure, right? Where do you pause? How do you define outcomes? So I think that would be another thing. Yeah. I mean, we are already at the end of it. Is it okay we take one more question?
Yes.
Okay. So this is something from Shri Watson. It's a very interesting question, and I think both of us can add to it. It says, what cultural or psychological hurdles might a first-time PM leader face, particularly in regions where leadership is centralized at the headquarters, let's say in the Western world, and the tech centers have fewer product leadership roles? Do you believe these dynamic poses a risk or barrier for career progression? I would probably ask you, since you worked in a lot of headquarters company, and I'm sure probably your companies had a extended offshore development center in some of the other parts of the world. What has been your observation?
Yeah, you're going to have better answers for this than me because you've actually lived it. I've only managed people who are in this position, but yeah, 100%. It's a huge cap on their career. And when they're not there in person, but we're there in person, and I'm flying into San Francisco every other week, but it costs them $2,000 to fly into San Francisco and it costs them 2 days worth of work. And so they only do it twice a month. Yeah, they grow their careers much more slowly. They have a much more difficult time creating relationships with leaders. And what it means is that they often need to have a much higher bar. So I had probably like one of the most amazing group product managers I ever worked at in Apollo, who was out in India.
Okay.
He was basically the only PM like out in India, but he was like one of the best PMs at all of Apollo. He still is. He's still there. And how did he do that? I mean, his impact was like 3-4x any other PM. It was simple, you know, you just sum up the results of his A/B test, the amount of ARR he is driving is just mind blowing. And so your craftsmanship, your ability to work with those engineers that you have, and he would motivate engineers to ship like twice as fast as what the estimate they had said. So just using your advantages of proximity to who you have to drive success and realize you are at a huge handicap is my opinion.
No, I completely so much agree to that, right? I think while there are definitely challenges which has, especially related to time zone, being a remote, you might be at times away from your ICP, right? But I think to look at the brighter side of it, you should look at the aspect of co-location, right? You are sitting with the engineering and probably with the support teams, right? So I would say from an execution perspective, you need to use that to your strength, right? That's definitely there. But at the same time, yes, having been done that, I think it is very important as a product leader based out of non-headquarter locations is that you need to also invest significant time building those inroads with your leadership counterparts in headquarters, right? Because it is true that a lot of decisions are made there, right? And it is very important that you are party to those decisions, right? So it definitely requires going that extra mile, even let's say including, for example, taking those night calls and stuff like that. But I would say if you make sure that your initial time, especially if you have taken up a new role, if you have just gotten into the organization, as much as you build focus on the craftsmanship, building relationships with your team within India, you need to make sure you travel, you have those, one-on-one FaceTime with all your stakeholders, right? So you need to invest on that because see, it all starts with that trust, credibility to say that yes, because once that is done, then I think it is more about sustaining it, right? So I mean, it is not nothing unique to India versus any other location. This happens everywhere, right? Because we all are now working in a distributed teams. In fact, a lot of organizations are like completely remote, right? So from a barrier perspective, yes, it is definitely a challenge because you do not get that FaceTime one-on-one every single day. But you need to maximize the levers that you have. You have to invest in building those inroads with them to build those credibility. Ask for help, voice your opinions, right? So I think we have seen amazing product leaders thriving out of India in these kind of setups. So I will not say that, this is not, I'm not saying it's easy, but we have seen a lot of success stories which do that. And I think a lot of organizations are also very sensitive to this aspect, right? For example, a couple of organizations where I have worked, it's like share the gain and share the pain. Why should you always have the night calls? Let's split the calls alternatively. One day you do your night and the next week I do the night, right? So I think it has to be an effort on both sides, but it is very much doable.
Well said.
Yeah, that was very, very, it was like, actually felt like going back my memory lane in the last few years. Thank you, Aakash. I think there were some really, really very interesting questions that we had from the folks. And thank you, Aakash, for sharing your perspectives. I really enjoyed our conversations here. And especially both of us could bring in some very diverse perspectives, given the kind of different, kind of organizations and different part of the world that we both have been working in. So I hope people find this useful. And thank you again so much, for spending your time over this conversations. And I can see a lot of people putting in that this conversation was very useful for them. So I would ask folks, if you continue to have questions, our event is there. Please keep sending your question as comments on that. And Aakash and I will make sure that we kind of answer that offline on the chat. Yeah. So, yeah, I will also be sharing this podcast recording onto my YouTube channel in the live series. So, folks who couldn't join us could also, log in and hear it at a later point of time.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Malti. It's my honor, honestly. It's rare you get to meet product leaders with 22 years of product experience and jam for a little bit. So this is really fun.
Yes, same here. Thank you. And yeah, hopefully we do another one soon. And yeah, have a good day, Akash. And thank you again.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye,
My pleasure.
everyone.
Bye. Bye, everyone.